Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished author from New Delhi, India, Mr. Kumar Vikram. Kumar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kumar is a publishing editor and author. He's an author of short essays, T.S. Eliot, An Intensive Study of Selected Poems. He's the co-author of Men's Lib and Other Literary, Cultural and Personal Essays. He's also a senior editor with the National Book Trust of India. So, Kumar, let me start by asking you, tell me a little bit about your own background and how it has influenced your writing.
Yeah, I just want to make one minor correction.
Mm-hmm.
The book on T.S. Eliot is the one which I have co-authored.
Okay.
And the book on Men's Lib is my own.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a very interesting question. I mean, talking about one's background. And see, I was, my father was a professor in English at Muzaffarpur in Bihar. And this is the place where I was brought up. And of course, since he was a professor and he was also a social activist. So, there was this kind of ambience in our family of not only book reading, but also some kind of, understanding and empathy with the social issues. That is the kind of ambience under which we were brought up. And so I will just give you one idea what I mean by that, because he was a professor in English, but he was a Gandhian, he was a socialist, he was also quite involved with the socio-political issues of his time. So as a kind of a deliberate decision, he sent us to Hindi medium schools.
Okay.
At the time, as far as I'm concerned, in 80s, all these English medium schools had already started coming up, and he was a professor in English. But it was a conscious decision on his part to send us to Hindi medium schools, so that we remain, aware and grounded about our social environment and the cultural issues which affect the society. And I think if you look at it, I can say that it was a visionary, but it was a risky decision. And it was a risky decision because I think he had this confidence that he would be able to look after our English, and so which he did, and that has kept us in good state. But I consider it a very risky decision because it is not always possible for you to give the ambience to your kids, which may or may not be completely in harmony with the wider social changes which might be happening.
Correct. Well said. And what inspired you to become a writer?
I do not know. I think it was there. It was there in me, and I didn't take much time. I didn't waste much time after my post-graduation. I did go for, the general, this thing of taking competitive exams, but I didn't waste much time. I would say hardly a year I wasted. I can say I wasted because I didn't take that path. Though nothing goes waste, because when I was preparing for civil services, I took up this subject called public administration, and whatever I studied in public administration at the time, though I didn't clear anything, any test and all that, but that has kept me in good state, and a lot of ideas which I learned at the time. So immediately after my post-graduation, within 2 weeks, I was an editorial assistant in a publishing house called Spectrum Books, which is in New Delhi. And And they were known for, they are still known, they're quite a prestigious name for publishing books related to preparation of civil services. And I was doing research in history for their books, in geography, that was also helping me. But I don't know how it happened. Maybe the editor, publisher, Mrs. Kalpana Rajaram, saw something in me, and I was asked to write a book which is called Short Essays. That was my first book. And I wrote a book called Short Essays, right there. And even after I left that, and then I was offered this book to write a critical evaluation of selected poems of T.S. Eliot. And this is very interesting because the original idea was to include certain poems of his earlier age, which are called the shorter poems, the Prufrock and the poems of 1920s and Holloman till Holloman. And then over a period of discussion, what happened that the editor also wanted to include the bigger poems like the Wasteland and the Ash Wednesday and all that. And then I said that for bigger poems, and since you want it within 1 year, I would rather say that I would like to co-opt my father there, because I don't think I would be able to do justice. I was very frank enough. And she said, but you have written so marvelously on shorter poems, and we just want to include it. But over the period, it became, the conversation went on that path, and everybody accepted it. And then become a strange and very, I would say, one of its own kind collaboration of father son writing a book. And that's why it is co-authorship is with my father only.
Amazing.
On T.S. Eliot.
Amazing. And that's such a positive experience to be able to write a book with your father.
Yeah, and because and my father was a different kind of personality. Even if he would write say something, an essay, a critical essay for me, maybe in graduation or post-graduation, he will give it to me and he say that just read it if you like it, and what is your opinion on it. He wouldn't say that I have written this critical piece for you, and you have to just sort of read it and memorize it and follow it. So it was a effort. It was, you would be surprised to know that the entire writing period went for over 5 years.
Wow.
And this book has already gone for 4 editions, because it's a very different kind of book. It's like a annotated analysis of T.S. Eliot's poetry. So the lines are there, then each and every line and every source, every implication is sort of explained, and then a full-fledged critical essay is written on a particular poem.
How wonderful.
And so it happened, and after Spectrum, I was for a year or so, I was in the field of I was a journalist. I was working for Press Trust of India. I also worked for a brief period for Women's Era and all. But when I was in Press Trust of India, and the kind of editing which was being given to us, I was not very satisfied, because they had a very set pattern of editing a story. And from there, I landed up in National Book Trust, and I'm there since almost 23 years. 24. This is my 24th year.
Amazing. So let's now move, Kumar, to your new book, which is Men's Lib and Other Literary, Cultural and Personal Essays. Tell me a little bit about the book, and what was your hypothesis when you wrote this book?
See, one thing, one major impact, sometimes what happens, you come across an author, you come across an idea, you come across a book, which changes your perspective too. So around 2002 to 2003, I came across this author called Edward W. Said, and he's one of the most important, rather the most important post-colonial theorist, and he passed away in 2005, and many a time he's also considered one of those last Renaissance heroes, because of the wide learning and all. and that gave me a different kind of perspective on looking at things from entirely different perspective. And I have always been interested in the issues of gender equality. I've always been interested in the feminist issues. But in men's lib, I would say after my study, after my research, after my thought process of, I would say, almost 2 decades, I came to believe, and then there are already research and there are already movements which are called men's lib, which happened in the USA in 1970s, and there are theorists and psychologists who are working upon it in places like Australia, which promotes the idea that patriarchy is something, the idea of patriarchy, the notion of patriarchy not only impacts women, it also impacts men. Because then as women are supposed to follow certain gender codes and gender roles, so men are also supposed to follow certain gender codes and gender roles. And as a contemporary modern person, I have not created patriarchy, and I but still I'm supposed to be its carrier. I there are certain roles, and as I really it's very interesting. Sometimes I really feel in Delhi, and since you're in Gurgaon, you understand. Sometimes maybe your car gets hit. Now, if your car gets hit, I would say that there is a prescribed behavioral pattern for you.
Correct.
You are not supposed to take it coolly, calmly. You're not supposed to talk to the person who has hit you. You're not supposed to call the police and try to sort out. You're not supposed to follow that pattern. The code is that you come out and you start fighting right on the street. And then you do, all kinds of, because that is what the role, the masculine role has been prescribed to. And if you don't do, then others would say, what kind of person he is not even reacting.
Very well said.
So it is just a
I'm with you.
kind of
and I think it's a great example to explain what you're saying between patriarchy and men's lib and so-called norms and mores that are formed about our lives.
So it comes down to this, that the male of these species, they also need to be liberated out of the false superiority complex given to them.
Correct.
The idea is that if you are born a male, that is an achievement in itself for you. As if 10 achievements are to be done in life, 7 and 8 have already been done by you because you have been born a male. So there is this is called, psychologists called the fallacy of achievements. These are illusions that are created around you. And then what happens? That it impacts you as an individual. It doesn't allow you to grow in a holistic manner, in a inclusive manner. Your personality suffers because you are continuously carrying this false superiority complex, and then it impacts your relationships. It impacts your your attitude to life and to society, to all kinds of roles and relationships which you have to handle. So this is one of the articles which is there, which is a lead article. I deliberately, there are many other essays, which are actually deal with historical ideas, with the cultural ideas, with the ideas of translation, and there are many different kinds of essays, but I deliberately put it as the lead essay. And when somebody asked me that, why do you call it men's lib? Then I said that had I not called it men's lib, this book, you wouldn't have asked me this question. Because suppose there is an essay on the nation building and dynamics of translation. Suppose this book had been called Nation Building and Dynamics of Translations and Other Essays, you wouldn't have asked me that why do you call this? Because these are some of the ideas which are being discussed maybe in a different way by other people, but to put it right in your face, the idea of men's lib. And then many a time people get confused because there is a different kind of men's slave movement which is happening contemporary, which actually believes in taking forward the superiority of men. So people get confused that are you on that side? That is, you need to read at least, to understand on which side we are.
Well said.
This is
so. My next question to you, Kumar, is that you've been a well-recognized author for the last 2 or 3 decades. Today, there are thousands of Indians who are writing and publishing. I want to get your perspective on how has the literary scene in India started to change, and how do you see it evolving for the future?
See, even the idea of literary scene in India, it's not a Indian literature. It's a matter of debate, but Indian literature per se is not a homogeneous, kind of a fabric, and there are people who write in languages, and now because of the identity discourse, becoming very pronounced, so you have the feminist literature, or you have literature coming from the margins, the Dalit discourse, as we say, and then there is a big kind of chasm between people who write in English, and there is a further gulf between people who write in English but who are settled abroad. And then what happens on an international scene, because the people who write in English and they are settled abroad, so they are better networked, so they become ambassadors of Indian literature.
Correct.
And whereas the quote unquote real literature is happening somewhere else, and in the languages. So this is all a part of the maturing of our society and our nation. And as we go along, I'm the kind of recognition which Indian language literature is hoping for. It will come by, because there was this Booker Prize for a Hindi novel which got translated into English. In fact, yesterday itself, and this International Booker Prize long list has been announced, and this Perumal Murugan's Pyre has been shortlisted. So these are, of course, again in English translation, but even through translation, people are, of course, trying to understand and recognize that the Indian linguistic scene is so wide, and we have 22 official languages in which people write, but they are just official languages. Beyond that, there are so many languages in which people write.
Correct.
So, but then there is another perspective which says that even if people write in different languages, these are all Indian languages. So they should be, we should say that it's a part and parcel of a one big whole. And so in that sense, it is Indian language. So these are the issues of debate which will keep going on. But I believe that the literature of India, especially in the new millennium, is getting recognized because of its Indian language writing, and the trend, I suppose, will continue further.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you for a response. Let me now move to my, I've got time for 2 more questions. You work with the National Book Trust, and when I was reading about you, you talk about a term called book diplomacy. What is book diplomacy, and help me understand this, and if possible, give me an example.
See, it's a niche area. It is something which is which happens in the I would say in the world of books and publishing industry, but even beyond that, book diplomacy can it is of course done by, on one level, by the government, institutions, but on the other level, the entire network of publishers, literary agents, editors, authors, they are also in one way or the other a part of that book diplomacy.
Mm.
Book diplomacy, as diplomacy, the term itself would mean, like pushing forward your perspective in a very subtle, in a very sophisticated manner, and here through the world of books.
Mm.
And in fact, it is related to what we were discussing, with reference to the previous question, that we would like, say, as country, we would like our ideas, our perspective, our literary and cultural perspective to percolate down to the wider audience in the world. And the only way to do is to engage with the people who deal with the world of books. So then the concept of translations, the concept of giving support or grant to the foreign publishers, so that they can take up your books, maybe Hindi book, maybe Malayalam book, and publish it there, maybe in German, maybe in French. And so you created a strategy, you create an ecosystem where your idea is to promote your literary and your cultural perspectives through the world of books. But it can also happen, if you said example, it can also happen, diplomacy is like, with the heads of state, sometimes they go to watch cricket matches, which just happened 10 days back. That's a kind of a sports diplomacy, that is called. And when heads of the government and heads of the states, they sometimes gift books.
Correct.
So when even at the top level, you gift Bhagavad Gita, you give maybe Rig Veda, or you give the Gandhi's autobiography. So at that level also, a kind of diplomacy is going on. Through the book, through the world of book, you introduce that idea. And if at such a high level a book is given as a gift, it is also according the kind of priority and the importance which you give to the world of ideas, to the world of books in our society, in your society. And then it gets covered, throughout the world it gets covered. Who gifted what. Absolutely. And so, and many a times, what happens that our say our heads of government, if they go out, they are given, say, if they go to, say, Mexico, they may be given, just for the sake of example, I'm saying, say, a Spanish translation of Bhagavad Gita.
Correct.
Now that is also diplomacy.
Absolutely.
We have translated your one of the most sacred and most important books in our languages, and we are giving you as a gift. So the kind of interaction and the layering which it has is something that that would require an approach, an understanding, an interpretation, skill, negotiation, which is termed maybe book diplomacy.
Fascinating. Very fascinating. Thank you for a great response. And my last question to you, and this for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation, based on your vast experience as an author and as an editor, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want to give to aspiring or writers or authors?
First is, of course, which everybody says, that you should have, if not very wide, but still reasonably wide reading. But I have a small advice to add to it, that more than having wide or extensive reading, you should have intensive readings of even limited number of books. Sometimes what happens that we read 100 books. But, we can say that we can say that we have read these many books.
Correct.
But we have not we have perhaps not read them intensively.
Correct.
So the ideas and the wisdom and the experiences which these books should be giving to you, and which should be reflected in your thought process, in your personality, and the way you look at things, that sometimes do not happen. I mean, you would be aghast to see a person saying that he has read 200 books, but when that person is talking, that is not getting reflected.
Absolutely.
That is not getting reflected. So you wonder what happened, where the reading of those 200 books going.
Correct.
When this person, when I'm discussing with him, is actually giving very third grade ideas to me.
Well
So
said.
why an extensive reading is important for a writer, but an intensive, in-depth reading of even a lesser number of books is more important.
Well said.
That is my way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Secondly, is that writing is something which cannot come to you in a very deliberate way. It has to come from within. When we say within, that means if you have something to say, if you have something to say, then only you would be able to write. And
Correct.
say would mean sharing. It may be your experiences, or it may be your perspective, your observation, but you must have something to say. And then only that a writing is something that will come to you. In fact,
Correct.
I would it is an anecdote. I don't know how far it is true, but there was a great Hindi poet called Baba Nagarjun. And it is said about him, we do not know whether it is a fact, but anecdote in itself is very important. So it is said that when he would go to some book release function or conferences, and he would be chief guest or main speaker, whatever. And then there are other speakers, and then if any speaker, some speaker would take sometimes people go off, and they will take a lot of time. Even if they are given 5 minutes, they will take 20 minutes. So Nagarjun would interject with this one-liner, "Bole to bahut, kuch kahiye bhi."
Well said.
Yeah. So you have spoken a lot. Now say something.
Correct. No, that's very powerful. Very powerful.
So it is attributed to Nagarjun. I do not know whether it is true or not. Correct. But this one-liner is very important.
Yes.
Yeah. So we must have something to say and something to share. And third, which is a kind of a life lesson, not only for writers, for anybody. We are living in these times of overexposure to media, to the digital overexposure, and we are too much concerned about promoting our books or getting recognized and all that. I think that is one temptation. Somehow a serious author must be able to check. It doesn't mean that you become a yogi and that you don't promote your book, or you become completely start living in seclusion and you don't meet. Not that. Not that, but a kind of as it is said, a passion with a sense of detachment.
Well said.
Passion, so commitment as well as detachment. This is something which is not for writers, for all people who are maybe in different vocations.
Absolutely.
So that sense of balance is needed. So I believe that if you have it in you, if there's some content in what you're writing, it will surely pick up. It will somehow, it will, and it is said that every book finds its readers. That's also a way of
very well said. On that note, Kumar, and your sorry, we've run out of time, but your 3 amazing lessons, which is read widely, but intensive reading is very important. The second one, which you said, was writing comes from within, and I loved your quote, "Bole to bahut, kuch kahiye bhi." And third one you said was, check your temptation, passion with detachment. Thank you so much for talking to me about your journey. Thank you for talking to me about your books. I will certainly go and check out your book, Men's Lib and Other Literary, Cultural and Personal Essays. And thank you also for talking to me about book diplomacy. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.